Today on the Perception and Action podcast, my interview with Phil Kearney and Alan Dutton from Movement Skill Acquisition Ireland, discussing their new 2022 webinar series, Applying Skill Acquisition in Different Domains. So it's time for a call to action. Hi, this is Rob Gray from Arizona State University. I've been on a now over 25-year journey as a researcher, professor, and high-performance consultant to understand how we acquire and adapt our perceptual motor skills. Welcome to the Perception and Action podcast, where I discuss how psychological research can be applied to improving performance, accelerating skill acquisition, and designing technologies. Before we get to today's topic, I want to tell you about my new book. Yes, I've written a new book on skill acquisition called How We Learn to Move, a revolution in the way we coach and practice sports skills. It covers the ecological approach to skill from different angles, including practice design, the CLA, coaching, youth sports, designing technology, injury prevention, and using analytics. So I hope you will consider giving it a read. You can find the book on Amazon or by going to perceptionaction.com/book. Now on to the show. So today I'm joined by Alan and Phil from the MSAI, Movement and Skill Acquisition Ireland, to talk about the upcoming or maybe already slightly started seminar series they have going on. Welcome, Alan and Phil.
Thanks for having us, Rob.
You're welcome. So to start off with, can you tell us just a little bit about the organization, what kind of the goals are and how it started? Maybe Phil. I probably have to pick people when there's two.
Yeah, thanks. I was wondering where we were going to be waiting or guessing across that one. So Movement and Skill Acquisition Ireland is relatively new. It formed, kind of coalesced in late 2017. It actually formed, I think, in Kisakallio in Finland. There's a great motor skill conference that runs there several years. I had been at the first conference. I wasn't at this one, but Ed Collin and Ollie Logan were. And they got chatting and they thought we really need to do something around skill acquisition and promoting it in Ireland, because we think there's a real appetite for people to understand more about skill acquisition in Ireland, but there isn't really an organization that's pushing that. And the legend has it that they mapped out on the back of a napkin the idea of what movement skill acquisition would be, a napkin which had been previously autographed by Carl Newell. So it was really a blessed organization from the start. And then, they decided there's going to be a bit of work involved in this. So who could do that work? So that's where Alan was roped in as somebody who would do an awful lot of the legwork, somebody who was a bit younger than the rest of us and social media savvy, and where I was roped in as well as somebody else to contribute in the space. I just moved back to Ireland at the time. And so essentially that's where it started. So it's an organization which is a group of individuals who are really passionate about skill acquisition. This is our primary interest. This is what we teach in some cases. This is what we research. This is Ollie's professional work, working with British Swimming. Mm-hmm. And so it's about how can we bring others into a conversation around skill acquisition so that the knowledge and awareness of skill acquisition, primarily on the island of Ireland, goes up. And we get these good conversations, good practices for coaches, and then everybody on the island of Ireland who's participating in sport at whatever level benefits. Yeah, no, I think it's embraces the exploration idea of this, giving people chances to interact and that. So Alan, can you tell us a little bit about the webinar series? This is the third one you have. Did you have an in-person meeting the first one, or is this? Yeah.
Yeah, so we began in 2018 with an actual conference. Mm-hmm. Not many of those happening nowadays.
Yeah, for sure.
Which was great. It was our inaugural conference, and we were very lucky. We had some great speakers. We had Keith Davids, we had Rick Shuttleworth, Mark O'Sullivan, Zoe Wimhurst. We had some really great people, Nick Winkelman too, and just to name some of the people who were there. And we really got an opportunity to kind of expose people to some of the work that was happening in a skill acquisition perspective. And I think what was great for us at the time as well is, and what we kind of put a big emphasis on, is having a discussion around skill acquisition. So after every kind of speaker, we would break out into breakout rooms, as they're known now. But at the time, we had a lot of chalkboards, a lot of whiteboards, and we had our kind of key speakers and some helpers to really drive the conversation around what had happened in the presentation into people's own context and the sports they were working in. So that was our inaugural conference in 2018, which was great. And then we moved to hopefully, which was supposed to be an in-person conference in 2020. And at the last minute, we moved online. And that was kind of around the coach, athletes, relationships, some brilliant speakers there as well. And that full series is on YouTube. We then did a Women in Discussion webinar after that. And that leads us to where we are here today. And that is skill acquisition across different domains.
Yeah, no, it's great. I've watched a lot of the previous ones, and they are great. And so this I think building on the other one, right? The idea is here to look at applying this kind of ideas of skill acquisition theory and motor learning theory across other contexts outside of just sports coaching, elite athletes, right? Phil, can you tell us a little bit about the kind of the theme for this new one coming up?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we noticed and we're really interested in is how there are individuals, as you say, outside of sports coaching and particularly high performance sports coaching, for whom skill acquisition, it can make a positive influence in their role. So you have, whether people are working in strength conditioning or whether they're working with special populations like Paralympics, whether they're working in rehabilitation, whether it's physical education, a knowledge of skill acquisition can be really helpful in these areas. But also, some of these areas have particular constraints or particular demands that they're working under. And so, they're experiencing, maybe an exaggerated challenge or an exaggerated problem. So if we think about Paralympics, for instance, it's very similar to what's happening in mainstream coaching. But the individual differences that you can experience within a group of Paralympics are greater. They're probably more. And so, what is it that those individuals working with or trying to employ the scientific discipline that is skill acquisition within that group, what is it that they have learned because of that exaggerated situation that would be beneficial for anyone who's coaching to learn? And so we think that there'd be great benefit from a compare and contrast between, as I said, Paralympics, physical education, strength conditioning, all these different disciplines, to see how are you employing skill acquisition? What are your particular challenges? What are the strategies that you're bringing in? And then, okay, everybody gets to learn from whichever discipline you're in and get something to think about how are you engaging with skill acquisition? How are you applying this? What are the tools? What are the strategies? What are the nuances that you see because of your unique perspective? And again, we think it'll stir up a good discussion.
Yeah, I agree completely, Phil. In the same way that you can learn from different sports as a coach, I think there's kind of this sometimes frustrating thing that, elite athletes are a completely different animal, right? People often critique research for, your elite athletes were just college players, or they're, 10 handicap golfers or something, which, yeah, there is a difference, but I don't think it's like a complete different animal, like qualitative difference. I think there's a lot we can learn from how people are using basically the same things in these different constraints, different domains. And so I think that's really exciting. Alan, do you want to get into maybe some of the, I don't know if we want to go through all of them or some of the specific speakers you have lined up?
Yeah, well, we opened with Professor Mark Williams, which is, I'm not sure I need to introduce him at all. I think he's an absolute juggernaut of the domain, and he has had a brilliant book released, like yourself, in the last few years, the best How Elite Athletes Are Made, which I think was a brilliant read. And he's going to be looking at kind of the past, the present, and the future of skill acquisition. And that kicks off on the 10th of February, which is very exciting. Looking forward to that one.
I think, just throwing in, Mark, he would always, I don't know, I'm sure you guys have went to ESON, the expertise in skill.
Yes.
Mark would always lead off, usually. Mark's got his fingers in so many things. He's a great person to give an overview of everything that's going on, I think. Like he's editor and publishing, and so I think that's a great idea. So
I also think that his new role as well. So he's moving, and he's got this new role, which is Institute of Human and Machine Cognition. Even just the name of it sounds okay. This is interesting. What exactly is happening here? What are the ideas you're exploring here? And give us a real sense of what's coming up next. Because I think he's got some really nice articles over the again, a couple of years back about the future of skill acquisition. I always think back when I'm introducing skill acquisition to a 2009 article he wrote with Paul Ford about what is skill acquisition for the Journal of Sports Sciences around the time of the London Olympics in the lead up to that. So, I think he's a really nice individual to start this whole process off.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And looking at the next two, I think, skill acquisition and strength and conditioning, and skill acquisition and para-sport coaching. Maybe can you tell us a bit about those, Phil? I'll switch back for you guys.
Yeah, sure. Well, in terms of Stephen Casey, so Stephen actually comes from links that Alan and Ed would know better. So I've kind of been doing a little bit of homework in terms of Stephen, and I got to be honest, I'm really looking forward to this. Mm-hmm. Stephen is a practitioner, so he's somebody who's coming in. He's done an awful lot of work with an awful lot of teams, from youth teams and kind of development squads all the way up to senior intercounty in the sport of hurling in particular, which is one of Ireland's national sports. It's an incredibly fast sport. It is an incredibly skillful sport as well, probably closest to ice hockey, but the ball travels through the air as opposed to on the ground. And it is an extremely skillful, extremely demanding sport. So for me, I'm really intrigued to hear Stephen talk about, his understanding about how he works with the skills coaches, with the head coaches, in order to integrate strength conditioning and skill development so that these two things balance, as opposed to being a competition and fighting for time. So how do we design the conditioning sessions to get both outcomes where possible? How do we manage the development of players? So we're thinking in terms of more long-term skill development, where you might have multi-sport, but also need to invest a lot of time in this sport, and what's the management process around that for skill development. So I think there's a whole host of questions, and I think Stephen is a great person because of his wealth of experiences across different levels to be able to comment on all that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm excited for that one a lot, because I keep saying that those skill and strength and conditioning need to be better integrate. They could be way better integrated and support each other than treating them as kind of silos. So it'd be really interesting to see someone that's doing that, in practice for sure. Then Ross and Georgia, do you want to? Alan, I don't know if there's a particular. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? What they're going to?
Yeah, so it's brilliant. The one benefit of a webinar series is we're able to reach a lot further than we may have been able to in person. And thankfully, we're able to get Ross Pinder and Georgia Askew to talk about skill acquisition in Paralympic sports. And I think, in the way Phil touched on earlier, it really highlights some of the challenges coaches may have from that perspective, where there's really unique organismic constraints for those athletes and how they integrate skill acquisition into that side of the coaching domain. I know I've a student at the moment who's doing a dissertation on CP football players, and it was the first one I signposted to him as a must watch for him, because it'll be, I think, fascinating to see how exploration from that side can lend into all other sides of sport.
Yeah, no, I think that's going to be really interesting. Yeah, and I know that's a big, a lot of work going on in that area. By a lot of people, better defining it and understanding the constraints and things. So I think that'll be a lot of fun. Next one, Phil Glasgow. This one is one of the things that I am personally really excited about, this area, that not only can all these ideas we have help performance, but that can actually keep people on the field longer and get them back quicker. Phil, can you tell us a little bit about that presentation?
Yeah, so again, I'm really excited for this one. I think that this idea that rehabilitation, where you've got people who are engaging in exercises, you're trying to accelerate their comeback. Oftentimes as well, if somebody has been injured, there might be a reason for that injury. So you're trying to not only rehabilitate them physically, but you're also trying to address what was the underlying cause of that. And so maybe there's some is a technical refinement or something that's required as part of the process. So it's an area where I think there's some nice case studies. I remember Howie Carson did a lovely one on a weightlifter in his rehabilitation at one point. But there isn't a huge amount of research here talking about the practicalities of, how does skill acquisition inform rehabilitation in particular. I think there's some lovely research looking at, for instance, specific items. There was some nice papers that tracked physiotherapists as they worked with recovering athletes, and they looked at their cues that they were using. Are they internal or external cues, and what's the way that they're organizing practice? And so we found there's maybe some scope for development among the practice of physiotherapists. So I think maybe some physiotherapists who are listening in might get some ideas about how they're working. But likewise, there's an awful lot of research from physical therapy and practice and ideas around physical therapy that might be informative for sports coaches. I know for me personally, one of my favorite all-time skill acquisition chapters is from Anne-Marie Gentile, and she's talking about stages of learning and a mapping of the learning process. That's my physical therapy book. So this is something that physical therapists, physiotherapists have been dealing with for a long time. And so they have got this really rich knowledge base and practice base. And so I'm really intrigued to see when we compare and contrast, what are we going to get? And so Phil Glasgow, in terms of his position, in terms of his wealth of experience lately with the IRFU, the Irish Rugby Football Union, I think is a great person to give us an insight into that.
Yeah, and I think, this is making me think, I think I like the idea. This is kind of breaking down the idea that, it's all a serial process. Like you get strong, you get skillful, you rehab. Like the same way we did with development, these all things are all interconnected. Rehab you can think of as just a different type of skill acquisition, like it's reacquiring it. So yeah, I think pulling it all together like this, I think is a great idea, and showing how it all interconnects.
If I can as well,
sure,
I think the point you made earlier, Rob, where it's not just about the elite, I think a really interesting part of this is that it can apply to a very broad spectrum of people. I think even if you look at the kind of the recent research on the control chaos continuum, they look at specificity, ecological validity, and kind of player interest. But if you replace player with person, and you're talking about an older adult who's looking to walk up a flight of stairs or coming back from an injury from that perspective, a lot of the same principles can be applied to those. It's just about picking up an understanding of the research and then applying it to their context, which I think this particular kind of area would benefit massively from.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's going to be really interesting. The next one you have, if anyone's listened to their conversations before, I think it'll be really fun to be in. You can be in one and ask questions. Is Jenny Coe and Nick Levitt, their coaches' conversations about skill acquisition. Alan, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, firstly, they are an excellent resource. I completely agree. They're brilliant to listen to, and I think it would be remiss of me not to mention Jenny Coe's recent book, The Myths of Sports Coaching, with Dr. Amy Whitehead as well. I think that's a fantastic resource as well. I'm about halfway through that, and it's a hard one to put down. But I think those two together are going to bring a fantastic conversation, as they say, and as they typically do. And I'm really interested to see where that webinar itself leads. I think it could go in a lot of different directions, but there's a really nice applied element to everything they discuss, and a real tangible feel to a lot of their discussions. So I'm really excited about that one.
Yeah, me too. I think the very definition of emergent conversations, they just kind of go where they feel. Next one, Phil, Shane Pill. Doctor, can you tell us a little bit about that one?
Yeah, so this was one that I was very keen on at the start. This is somebody that I thought actually there's a really nice perspective that we can get here, and I hope a really challenging perspective as well, because when we look at skill acquisition and motor learning, there's an awful lot of, and historically there has been a certain viewpoints. There's a more cognitive or hierarchical or information processing view, and then there's an ecological view, and in different forms, these two have dominated the motor learning research for quite some time. Shane actually comes from an educational background, and so he's bringing not necessarily motor learning theories, but more educational psychology theories and theories that have come from classroom education. And this gives us a slightly different perspective. And the theories that are covered there's a lot of similarities with aspects of, say, the ecological approach, but there are some differences as well. And there's some differences in the nuance and the emphasis in terms of, what they recommend for the design of practice sessions. So I think, you would see dialogue, for instance, between coach and players within an ecological session, but it wouldn't have as big an emphasis as it has with somebody coming from an educational psychology perspective. So we see the same tools, but a different emphasis. And so I think Shane has a huge wealth of experience within physical education, teacher education, but also working with a whole range of different sports down in Australia. And so he bridges this gap between coaching and physical education. He's got a foot in both camps. He sees what's happening, the changes that have happened. He brings a really, really great wealth of experience to this. And so I think he's going to give us a really nice kind of critical commentary and to prompt a really nice discussion as well for us with that perspective that covers coaching and physical education.
Yeah, I agree. I'm looking forward to this one a lot too, because I would say that, even Shane's obviously PE, physical education focused, but I think if you're interested at all in using games for coaching, I would say Shane's one of the most knowledgeable people about teaching games for understanding, sense, whatever you want to call it. I think he understands the subtleties of the different ways to use it and things. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to that one.
Actually, as you say, when we talk about the subtleties, that's the bit that I really like about the research and the work that he puts out there. He talks, this is the subtleties of how this is applied in practice. So he gives a really good guidance for anyone looking to use games in a more sophisticated way within their practice.
Yeah. The next one, Alan, we have a former guest I've had on the podcast here, James Rudd and Katie Fitton-Davies. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, another fantastic set of speakers. To be honest, I know we were putting together this list, and Ed commented on it, that you kind of go through the process of getting people, and when you look back, you go, wow, this is a really great list of speakers, and these two are going to provide some really interesting insights kind of towards the earlier stage of kind of primary PE rather than secondary PE. And they had that kind of great paper where they had that kind of sample PE concept where they were looking at skill acquisition methods and how you can kind of foster physical literacy in early physical education. And what I really like is kind of their concepts of operationalizing physical literacy by enriching the environment in a PE setting. So while it is, again, PE focused, there's a really nice ecological sense to a lot of the kind of work that they've done together. And I think, children movement competencies is something that's really important and one that sets up people for life if they engage really well early. And you see great examples on social media, but introducing that exploration for kids at that younger age, learning to learn and engaging in how to explore is a fantastic way to view PE, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what those two give us.
Yeah, me too. And I think, we started with saying this, we're moving beyond high performance athletics with this, but I think I would be, warn people, don't just if you work in that area, don't just look at these and dismiss, they're talking about PE. I'm not going to get anything out of that. They're looking at kids. I think this is a great example because one of the things James and Katie I know are doing a lot is a measurement and quantification. Like a question I get asked a lot is, how do I measure when I'm using an ecological approach to constraints? What can I measure to know that it's working or improving? And I think they're really addressing that question in a PE context with a lot of interest, like measuring divergent actions instead of convergent. Yeah, I think they have a lot of great ideas that can extend all the way up the chain. So I think that's great. And the last one, sorry. Oh, sorry, Phil.
I was going to say, you've just done, I think what you've touched on there is actually a real weakness in skill acquisition in general. How do we assess skill? How do we assess the effectiveness of our development? And I think one of the reasons for that is because, within skill acquisition, we're really concerned with the problem of transfer. Does it transfer from the practice environment to the competition environment? And we're really aware of how hard it is to get transfer. And so we're really cautious about, we've got to have really good assessment. So I think that maybe holds us back compared to other disciplines where they don't think about that as much. And maybe I don't necessarily think that we haven't got the tests because we're not investing in the tests, but I think other disciplines might have got tests, but they may not be as good as they think they are. Whereas we're really concerned that, is this a really good test before we go and use it? So I think that measurement work that they're doing is just so valuable. For the field as a whole. And as you say, that's the kind of thing that doesn't matter if you're not working with primary school age children. There are ideas within this that might spark your thinking about, yes, you know what, I can explore that in my practice.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Phil. And I think if we, not that this is only focused on the ecological approach, but if you are, I think we need to give people tools to kind of support them. Coaches have constraints too, right? Showing they're getting results and winning and so I think these are addressing some of that issue as well. And the last one, you just tacked on some random guy just for. So I'm doing the last one. I think I'm going to do a Q&A, I think, about the ecological approach. So I think that will be fun. I get a lot of different questions. I think, just exploring it. So I think I love kind of exploring and hearing about the ways people are using it. So I'm looking forward to doing that as well. And try to see if we can tie it into the rest of them. So, Alan, can you tell us a bit about kind of the mechanics of this if you want to be involved? I know that it's available later on, but you can also sign up to be within the actual recording sessions of them, right?
Yeah, so we the easiest way to find us is through our social medias. Our most active will probably be Twitter and Facebook. And we try to get it out through our own individual LinkedIn's, and we have an Instagram as well, but I would focus primarily on the kind of Twitter and Facebook. So what we do is we set up a Zoom call and we look to have roughly kind of 100 people on that call with us. So within that, we have the first 20 minutes to a half an hour is kind of a presentation concept where speakers will present on their general topic, and then we leave the remainder of the hour to questions and answers. And that kind of comes back to what we strive for in our inaugural conferences, really generating a discussion around the presentation, around the concepts and how you can take those into your own setting. It's about just giving somebody a flavor of what's happening in this setting and making people aware of the people and the great people who are doing really good work in these areas, so they can dive in and maybe pester and harass them afterwards for more information. So our registration links will typically go on Twitter early in the week for one of those. If you don't register, we do go live at the same time on YouTube. So you can engage and you can ask questions from YouTube as well, where we'll just feed it through to one of us. So there's an opportunity to kind of engage, and then everything is on our Movement and Skill Acquisition Ireland YouTube page afterwards.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think that's and almost everybody I've met in this area loves to talk about it forever. So you're not pestering. People are happy to be pestered about it. So I think that's, if you can join the live, I think that would be a great, way to get your questions in there and things like that. Yeah, so it sounds really great. So as we said, starting on the 10th, right? The first one with Mark Williams on the 10th, and then is it weekly after that?
Typically with some gaps.
Okay, so you gotta just watch the social media or announcement and things like that to catch the next.
You got to keep people agile.
For sure, yeah. Constraints, right? Exactly. Unpredictability, variability. So you get people moving. So is there anything else that you'd like to add, or we missed it all?
No, I'd like to say, first off, thanks very much for joining us to close the series, Rob. I think I'm really looking forward to that and looking at how we can get lots of different questions to you around that from the different areas, inspired by all the different areas. And secondly, thank you very much for, two things. One, for this little hosting piece, and also for the fantastic work that you're doing with the Perception Action podcast. It's become a go-to resource for me, one of the number one resources that I send out to anyone who's looking to learn more about skill acquisition. So you're doing absolutely fantastic work and really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you guys. My pleasure. And then, I really appreciate your guys' effort you put into this. And, doing things like, I really like last one you did where it was all female speakers, which is not, as a person that tries to recruit interviews on my podcast, it's not that's a little challenging in sports science, right? to get, so I really appreciate it. And then doing such a diverse range, it would be easy just to, slap together a list, but I appreciate the diversity of things you're trying to do with this. It's really great. Okay, that's it for today's episode. Remember, you can contact me at robgray@asu.edu or follow me on Twitter @ShakyWeights. To find out more about the podcast, please check out perceptionaction.com. Finally, to support the podcast and receive bonus materials, including written transcripts, please head over to patreon.com/perceptionaction. This is Rob Gray from ASU. Cheers for now, and keep them coupled.